Long before the first temple rose, before any king wore a crown or a single word was written, something was already watching. The stars. Among them, one stood apart, a hunter, frozen in the sky beyond time. Ancient civilizations didn't just see stars, they saw a presence, a guide, a god. The Sumerians called him Uru-Ana, the light of heaven. The Egyptians believed he was the soul of Osiris, god of resurrection. In Greece, he was a giant and warrior. In the frozen north, a traveler between worlds. Across the Americas, he was fire creation itself. They all saw Orion. Different lands, different languages, same constellation. But how, why is Orion carved into temples, mapped in pyramids, echoed in myths from cultures that never met? What if Orion isn't just a star pattern? What if it's a message left behind by someone before us? A cosmic key hidden in plain sight. Some say it's coincidence. Others believe it's a code. And if there is a secret, there must be a reason it's hidden. Watch till the end, because what you'll discover might just change how you see the sky forever. And if you're drawn to ancient mysteries and hidden truths, subscribe. This is just the beginning. To the start. The country of Sumer, which is now Iraq, is where some of the oldest stories were written down on clay tablets. A place where the gods picked monarchs and came down from the skies. One constellation stood out among the stars. The Sumerians named it Uru-Ana, which means the light of heaven. To them, Orion was a sign of monarchy, a sign of God's power, and a throne in the sky. In Sumerian culture, the stars were not far off scorching suns. They were places where God had power. And among them, Orion was the place where something bigger happened. The name Uru-Ana, which means heavenly light, makes me think of something more than just a pattern in the sky. Some people thought it was Anu's throne, the king of the sky. In some, a heavenly gate, a place where the worlds of the gods and the living met. This is not a trivial issue. According to Sumerians, the universe was made up of levels. The earth is in the middle, the underworld is below, and heaven is above. The gods controlled from above, and Orion Uru-Ana was a direct conduit to their world. The Epic of Gilgamesh is one of the oldest stories in the world. It is about a great king who is part god and part man, who wants to break free from the restrictions of being mortal. One of the most renowned conflicts in ancient mythology is the killing of the bull of heaven, which he has to fight along the way. The gods sent the bull, which was named Gugal-Ana, to punish Gilgamesh. But instead of giving in to God's will, he fights back. He kills the beast even though the gods tell him not to. This conflict is perfectly reflected in the night sky. Orion the hunter is always fighting with Taurus the bull. Is this just a coincidence, or did the Sumerians map their mythology onto the stars, or anything else? People thought that Gilgamesh was 2/3 divine and that he came from the gods who lived above. Some people think this was a metaphor. Some people think it was literally true that the ruling elite of Sumer came from beings who came from the heavens. One of the most well-known and beautiful constellations in the night sky is Orion. People from all around the world have known about it for thousands of years. Its structure is made up of some of the brightest and biggest stars in the galaxy. Betelgeuse, a red supergiant star that is 642 light-years away, is on Orion's shoulder. It is one of the biggest stars we know of, with a radius that is more than 600 times that of the Sun. If it were in the middle of our solar system, its outer layers would reach past Jupiter. Betelgeuse is unstable and close to the end of its life. It is projected to go through a supernova outburst soon, which would momentarily outshine entire galaxies. Rigel, a blue supergiant 860 light-years away, located on the other side of Orion's foot. One of the brightest stars in the sky at night. It burns with 120,000 times the brightness of the sun, sending forth huge amounts of energy throughout the universe. It too will eventually become a supernova. Bellatrix, a blue giant that is 240 light-years distant, and Scythe, another blue supergiant that is 720 light-years away, are close by. These stars make up the shape of the hunter's body, but Orion's belt is what most people recognize him by. 3 stars that are almost perfectly aligned and have been used as navigational aids, spiritual symbols, and astrological references by many cultures throughout history. The easternmost of the 3 Alnitek is a triple star system that is 1/260 light-years away. The main part is a huge blue supergiant that gives off heat at very high temperatures. Alnilam, a supergiant 2,000 light-years away that gives off 375,000 times the energy of the Sun, is at the core of the belt. To the west is Mintaka, a binary star system that is 1/200 light-years away and has 2 stars that orbit each other every 5.7 days. These stars don't just line up in the sky, they all came from the same huge molecular cloud, which is still in space and is a place where stars are born. The Orion Nebula is another phenomenon that appears below the belt. This huge area of gas and dust is 24 light-years wide and is one of the most active places in the galaxy where stars are born. It is 1,344 light-years away and may be seen with the naked eye as a faint glow below Orion's belt. In Greek mythology, Orion was a giant, a hunter, and a person who was both very strong and very unlucky. People thought that Orion was the son of Poseidon, the deity of the sea, and Oriahel, the daughter of King Minos of Crete. Orion was given an amazing gift since he was a god, the power to walk on water. He was a famous hunter who wandered the earth, feared and admired by all. He was taller than most people. One of the most famous stories about him is about his stay in the court of King Oenopion, who ruled Chios. He fell in love with Merope, the king's daughter, but she didn't want him to. When he tried to force her, Oenopion punished him by blinding him and throwing him out. Orion finally made it to Hephaestus's forge, the deity of fire and workmanship, after stumbling around in the dark. Orion traveled to the Far East with the help of a servant who showed him the way. There, the healing rays of Helios, the sun god, gave him back his sight. But it wasn't the end of his problems. He bragged in another version of his narrative that he was the best hunter in the world and that he could kill every animal on the planet. Gaia, the goddess of all life, was angry with him because he was so arrogant. To punish him, she sent a huge scorpion to kill him. They fought, but in the end, he was stung and died. To memorialize their fight, Zeus put them both in the stars Orion as the great hunter and Scorpius, who would always chase him throughout the sky. Even now, the 2 constellations are on opposing sides of the sky, which means that Orion always sets as Scorpius rises. The Bible talks about Orion as one of the few constellations. Long before telescopes and modern astronomy, people in the past gazed up and saw a powerful figure in the stars. But the Hebrew Bible called Orion by a different name, Kaisel. In the book of Job, which is one of the oldest books in the Bible, Orion is mentioned as a creation of God and a powerful force in the heavens that reminds us of God's power. Job 9:9 says that he made the bear Orion, the Pleiades, and the southern stars. In this text, Orion is mentioned as one of the big star groups that make up the night sky, along with Pleiades and the bear, which probably means Ursa Major. In Job 38:31, God personally asked Job if he can tie the chains of the Pleiades. Are you able to loosen Orion's belt? The prophet Amos also says something similar. In Amos 5:16, God is called the Lord. He formed the Pleiades, and Orion changes midnight into daylight and day into night, calls for the waters of the sea and pours them forth over the land. The ancient Egyptians thought of the sky as a map, a living, breathing kingdom where the gods lived, the dead traveled, and the great cycles of life went on forever. The Egyptians thought Orion was a god, a monarch, and a method to get to the afterlife. Osiris was his name. Osiris, the deity of resurrection, was not just metaphorically connected to the constellation Orion. He was Orion himself. Egyptian writings stated that his soul lived among the stars and ruled over the Duat, the unseen world where the deceased went once they died. The pharaoh was not just a ruler of humanity, he was also the living Horus. When he died, he would become Osiris and join Orion in the sky. But why Orion? Why not the moon, the sun, or another heavenly body? The solution is in a cycle that has been going on from the beginning of time. Orion goes away from the night sky for 70 days every year, and then it comes back to life in the east. For the Egyptians, this was more than just an astronomical occurrence. It was a ritual, a cosmic play happening in the sky. 70 days, the same amount of time it took for the deceased to be embalmed before they were buried, and also the same amount of time Osiris was thought to have spent in the underworld before he rose again. And thus was the pharaoh's fate. The pyramid texts, which are the oldest religious writings in the world, talk about the pharaoh's trip to Orion. They say that the king's soul rose into the sky like a star and joined Osiris. One text says, "You are sitting on your throne next to Osiris, and your soul is among the stars of Orion." The colossal pyramids of Giza have been a witness to their size, accuracy, and purpose for thousands of years. Egyptologists say they were tombs, yet no mummy has ever been found within any of the pyramids. Robert Bauval, an engineer, saw something weird in 1983. The three big pyramids weren't in a straight line. One of them, Menkare's pyramid, was not perfectly straight. At first, this looked like a flaw, but then Bauval gazed up at the sky. He spotted the same pattern there in the middle of the Orion constellation. The three stars in Orion's belt are not quite lined up, just like the pyramids below. This was not a mistake. There was a plan for the pyramids to be erected. The stars of Orion's belt were locked in stone above them, and their arrangement was a reflection of that. But the alignments didn't end there. The southern shaft of the Great Pyramid is one of the few direct entrances in the construction. It points directly to Orion, as if it was meant to bring the pharaoh's spirit back to the gods, back to Orion, and back to Osiris. The Great Pyramid has 4 of these shafts, 2 coming from the king's room and 2 coming from the queen's chamber. The southern shaft of the king's chamber is the most famous of these. When the pyramid was built, it was perfectly lined up with Orion's belt. This shaft pointed straight at Anunnaki, the brightest and lowest star in Orion's belt, around 2450 BC. Some academics think that the pyramid was more than simply a religious monument. They think it was a very complex building that could interact with energy fields. It may have even been a gadget that made it easier for people to communicate or travel between Earth and Orion. Some academics think the Great Pyramid may have formerly worked as a resonance chamber because it exhibits strange electromagnetic qualities. If the pharaoh was supposed to go back to the gods, Orion may have been more than simply a symbolic place to go. Orion's fingerprint can be found in more than just Egypt. The ancient city of Teotihuacan in Mexico is exactly in line with this one. The pyramids of the sun, the moon, and Quetzalcoatl are all slightly off, just like Giza. This is because they are all in the same spot as Orion's belt. 2 cultures separated by thousands of miles perceive the same thing and make the same things. But why? And it doesn't stop there. A long time before the pharaohs came to power, people created an ancient stone circle called Nabta Playa in the deserts of southern Egypt to line up with Orion. Some of the oldest astronomical marks in the world were put there before the pyramids were built. What caused this pattern to continue? Why did civilizations from different times and places all go back to Orion? Was it just a guiding star or a holy symbol? Or was it something else? A memory that has lasted through the years. A message carved onto stone. People in the ancient world knew Orion as a hunter, a warrior, and a god who ruled the heavens. But what about the North? Orion is still important in Norse cultures, which have their own stories about giants and gods. Egypt and Babylon had structured pantheons, but Norse mythology was more flexible. It was passed down orally from skald to skald. Many of its celestial myths have been lost, broken up by time and conversion, but some still exist. One of the most interesting connections can be found in the story of Orwendil, which is also known as Orgelmir's toe. In Norse mythology, Orwendil was a renowned wanderer whose frost-bitten toe was flung into the sky by Thor and turned into a star. Some historians think this star was Rigel, the bright blue-white star at Orion's foot. But this is just a piece. Some authors say that Norse mythology saw Orion, or someone like him, as a famous hunter or warrior. If that were the case, he wouldn't have been alone. There are several heavenly hunters in Norse cosmology. People knew Ular, the god of archery, as a brilliant skier and marksman. Tyr, the one-handed god of war, was like Orion in that he had scars from battles. Thor, the god of storms and destruction who wields Mjolnir, is just as powerful and present in the sky as Orion. But were these connections planned or just memories from the past? Unlike the detailed astronomical records of Babylon or the precise mathematical alignments of Egypt, Norse star wisdom did not survive in writing. A lot of the old wisdom had already faded away by the time the Eddas were written down, thanks to the spread of Christianity. But the Norse still had something very important: the ability to find their way by the stars. Viking sailors used the sun, moon, and stars like Orion to find their way through the North Atlantic. just like it had been for sailors in the Mediterranean, the Pacific, and beyond. Orion's belt with its 3 bright stars was a good way to find your way. Time may have made it hard to see him in the north. Maybe his part was never entirely written down, simply uttered. Or maybe he was purposely eliminated like many other old symbols. In the east, Orion's story changes into one of storms, fire destruction, and power. Hindu mythology connects him to Rudra, the god of storms, the renowned archer, the god who wanders the wild, and the god who would later be known as Shiva. The Rig Veda, which is the earliest Hindu literature and dates back to 2000 BC, calls Rudra the Red One. This is because the star Betelgeuse, the red giant, stands on Orion's shoulder. Rudra is shown as a hunter with a bow from the heavens. He is a force of destruction. He brings death, but he also makes it possible for new life to begin. He is the archer who destroys lies and the warrior who kills ignorance. Different names and stories, but the same story. The Watchers, who were angels who came to earth before the deluge, are in the first book of Enoch. One is different. Azazel was his name. Azazel is the Watcher in the book of Enoch, who taught people about weapons, conflict, and fighting. People say he taught people how to work with metal, make swords, knives, shields, and other tools for both survival and destruction. And Azazel taught them how to create swords, knives, shields, breastplates, and how to use them. The first Enoch 8:1, but his generosity didn't end there. He taught people how to use makeup, jewelry, and other things to make themselves look good and trick others. According to the book of Enoch, he lured people to sin and ruined the world's purity. And for this, he was thrown down and tied up under the earth until the day of judgment. If Azazel taught people how to hunt and fight, then he should be in the sky as well as in books. Orion is the hunter in the sky in many cultures. The warrior who always had a weapon was fighting Taurus the bull. Azazel's teachings made warriors in the same way. Men who fought won and rose above their natural state. Is this just a symbol or a memory? The book of Enoch says that the Watchers married humans and had kids. The Nephilim were the giants of old. People said these beings were outstanding hunters and warriors. Orion was also a giant, and he was a hunter among hunters. He is a Promethean character who gives people forbidden knowledge and gives them weapons either to survive or to fight back. The tale of a divine entity descending, instructing humanity, and subsequently becoming an outcast is not exclusive to Enochian tradition. The Anunnaki were said to have provided the first knowledge of civilization in Mesopotamian tradition, but eventually they were considered as rebels against cosmic order. Enki, like Azazel, was a god who taught people how to farm, do science, and stay alive. He was later demonized like Azazel and portrayed as a trickster who fooled the gods. The book of Enoch says that Azazel was sent into darkness after ruining the earth and tied up in the sand. His name is associated to the wilderness and the wastelands. In Hebrew tradition, the Yom Kippur scapegoat ceremony involves throwing a sacrificial goat into the desert for Azazel. This is a symbolic way of sending all of humanity's sins into the blank. One of the weirdest links to Orion can be seen on Gnostic amulets from the early Christian era. Abraxas was a mix of opposites: a man's body, a hawk's or rooster's head, and the legs of a snake. He was thought to be more than gods and demons. To the early Gnostics, he was the whole thing, the power that held both light and evil, time and eternity, and creation and destruction. The earliest and most thorough mentions of Abraxas are from Basilides, a Gnostic teacher from Alexandria, Egypt, who lived in the early 2nd century AD. Basilides said that Abraxas was the highest divine deity, even higher than the God of the Bible. He talked about a cosmic order in which Abraxas ruled over 365 heavens, each with its own spiritual force. Sadly, the original works of Basilides have not survived. We only know about them from early Christian theologians who said his ideas were wrong. Irenaeus, Hippolytus, and Tertullian, among others, wrote a much against Gnosticism, but in trying to undermine it, they kept important information about Abraxas. In Against Heresies, Irenaeus wrote about how Basilides' disciples thought that Abraxas was the great archon above everything. In refutation of all heresies, Hippolytus said that Abraxas was the lord of the 365 skies and that he was connected to secret knowledge. Tertullian made fun of Basilides for believing in a god that was different from the standard Christian view of God in his book Against the Valentinians. These works were supposed to obliterate Abraxas from history, yet they are now some of the strongest materials we have concerning him. But maybe the most convincing proof of Abraxas comes from antique gemstones and amulets from the 2nd to 4th centuries AD found all across the Mediterranean. These carved stones show Abraxas with a rooster or hawk head, a man's body and snake legs. Many of them have names on them such as Yah, a mystical term for God Sabaoth, Lord of Hosts, and Abraxas itself. Some of these amulets had motifs from Egypt, Greece, and Gnosticism, which makes it seem like Abraxas was a god who combined many religions. One that goes beyond religion and culture. Scholars think they were used to defend people, give them power, and teach them secret knowledge. But the name Abraxas has an even bigger secret. Isopsophy is a system that is similar to Hebrew. Of Greek, the letters of Alpha, Beta, Rho, Alpha, Sigma, Alpha, Shu sum up to 365, which is the precise number of days in a solar year. The Orion constellation also represents a yearly cycle coming and going with the seasons. Osiris, the deity of death and resurrection, was Orion in ancient Egypt. His yearly cycle was like the floods of the Nile and the regeneration of the land. The Gnostics thought that Abraxas was in charge of time, just like Orion's movement changed the ancient calendar. Was Abraxas not only a divinity of the mind, but also a reflection of the great hunter in the sky? Abraxas is often represented with a snake's legs and a hawk's head, which are two quite different things. These symbols also show up in the stories about Orion. In Egypt, Orion was connected to Osiris, who was also connected to Horus the god with a hawk's head. Horus was the avenger, the warrior in the force of cosmic order. Orion was the celestial hunter always on the hunt. The Gnostics believed that false gods called archons dominated the universe and kept the soul locked in the physical world. But Abraxas was above them, and they couldn't control him. But this is where things get even stranger. If you put Abraxas and Orion on top of each other, they look like they line up. Orion is also shown as a person who is always fighting against Taurus the bull, against forces he can't see that want to draw him down. According to Egyptian religion, the pharaoh's soul would go to Orion to get away from death and illusion. The Gnostics believed that the purpose of existence was to awaken and escape the archon's prison. Could people have thought of Orion as the road to freedom in the sky? If Abraxas was really a power that went beyond creation and destruction and connected the material and the divine, then maybe Orion was his shape in the stars. The everlasting hunter, the one who is continuously looking for something and never finds it. The snake and the hawk. The hunter and the one who fell. The sign of time and new life. Orion and Abraxas. One mystery with two names. What did the ancients actually want to say? The Anunnaki were the gods of Sumer and the builders of their society. Their knowledge was inscribed in stone, and their influence molded the oldest empires. But if these beings originated from the stars, the question still stands. Which stars? The Sumerians talked about a celestial order which was like the divine architecture on Earth. They created ziggurats to connect different worlds and made sure that their holy places were in line with the movements of the stars. But one of the stars above stood out, the light from above, Uruvana, Orion. Not only did the ancient kings of Sumer and Egypt say they had divine right as rulers, but they also said they were God's descendants. They joined forces with Orion, hoping to find their place among the stars after they died. In the world's esoteric traditions, Orion is far more than a constellation. It's a threshold, a line between realms. On some ancient star maps, Orion isn't shown as a man, but as a gateway, a passage to something beyond. In Hermetic and Kabbalistic teachings, Orion is described as a cosmic bridge connecting the higher and lower worlds, a path through which souls and divine energies pass. The Egyptians called it the road to paradise. To the Gnostics, Orion offered a path beyond the control of the archons. To the Hermeticists, it was a symbol encrypted in alchemical riddles. Was Orion seen as an actual gateway, a channel for the divine to reach Earth, or was it a code hidden in plain sight? Ancient Egyptians believed their souls would travel to Orion to reunite with Osiris. In the pyramid text, they wrote, "You are seated beside Osiris on your throne." They believed their essence would become one with the stars of Orion. But was this just myth, or were they preserving a truth, one that traces all the way back to the time of the Anunnaki? Because the more you look, the more Orion appears. On sacred sites, in myths, encoded in the architecture of Giza and Teotihuacan, whispered in rituals, buried deep in forgotten teachings. If Orion is a sign from the gods, what is it pointing to, and why has its mark been left all across the world?